Hey everyone, welcome back to Adobe Live at Adobe Symposium 2019, and I'm here with the lovely Chi. Ryan, how are you?
I'm very good. It's been a big day yesterday.
It's a big place as well because you were over the other side at a like a workshop or something, weren't you?
Yes.
And then having to get here and
Ran over here.
yeah, I've noticed there's those people on like little cars. I'm like, how do you get on one of those? Like a little golf buggy?
Are you serious?
Yeah, they look awesome.
I want one. I haven't seen those, but it's what I didn't know was this building has two sides,
Yes.
and I had to go down all the escalators across and then up.
Oh, right. Okay. Yeah, that's really hard. Yeah.
That's a good segue into
User experience.
it. Well,
You don't like user experience.
I don't
do
like
you?
the word user experience.
Talk to us about that.
Well, I think I don't like the term user experience because the word user to me has some really negative connotations.
Yep. High school.
Growing up in
Yeah.
Australia, a user is someone who takes advantage of you.
Yep.
So I don't love calling the people that I design for users. Mostly I try to call them people.
Yep.
If that's who
Humans.
Humans?
Yep.
Humans?
Humans. So talk about HCD then, because obviously you do the HCD podcast, and what I love about that is that you're trying to explain, I guess, what HCD is. Do you think we're any closer to people kind of understanding? Because it feels like we are sometimes, and then other times I feel like that people just are not getting it.
I think it's all of those things. I mean, the podcast is really about continuing to have a conversation around that, because if we don't keep talking about it, maybe it'll just slip away. That tends to be the case with craft. If we don't talk about it, it slips away. And I'm a massive fan of ancient Egypt, and in particular, I think craft is really interesting in that sense because, there was a period of time where the ancient Egyptians just sort of lost their
I love
craft.
that you're into ancient Egypt. So
Well, I have this whole spiel that I'm really into Graham Hancock, who's
Right.
an ancient civilization historian.
Yeah.
If you haven't heard about Graham Hancock, you should definitely look him up. He's one of the very few banned TED Talks. He has a TED Talk called The War on Consciousness. Definitely worth a watch if you're into that. That's one part of what he talks about, but the other part of what he talks about a lot is ancient civilizations. And I actually went to Egypt and did a archaeological tour with him, which was amazing. And we got to meet Dr. Hawass, who's like the most famous Egyptologist, let's say, in the world. And they had a debate, and it was pretty tense. Because and Graham's really interesting. He does a lot of research into. He probably doesn't recognize it as this, and I think this comes back to your point. He probably doesn't recognize it as design. He probably recognizes what he's looking at as symbology and the
semiotics. And all that, yeah.
But in fact, at the time, I guess those were things that those people were designing, and how there's similarities across continents and so forth.
Yeah.
Coming back to your question, I think that if we don't keep practicing things get lost along the way, and so having a constant conversation around anchoring ourselves in what it means to be human. And this is what I spoke about yesterday, is that experience to me is at the core of human existence. If we're not here to experience, why are we here at all?
Yeah.
So to that end, I think that there are people who are doing human-centered design without knowing it. And I think that there's people who have done human-centered design who, for whatever reason, get sidetracked. And the practice is about coming back to that and coming back to that. And then for the people who might be practicing it, like my mum, who don't really see themselves as practicing human-centered design or design at all, really, that conversation is about getting them involved, because there's people out there who just have amazing insights when it comes to humans. And the reality is, when it comes to designing for people, we're all involved, and especially when it comes to experience, we're all involved in creating the experience, whether it be the experience that you have when you go to a petrol station and the guy at the counter takes your takes your money. There's an experience in that. There's an experience in, you know, everything.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that human-centered design is it ebbs and flows.
Yeah.
You know, 1 minute it's a high, and then we sort of roll off when the next trend comes along. But we certainly with the podcast try to keep the conversation going.
It's a great podcast, and I've got so many questions. I want to completely ignore my questions first. So, have you read *Sapiens*?
Yes.
So when you were talking about the kind of experience self, and have you read the second book, Homo Deus?
No, I haven't, but
Right.
I've heard of it, yes.
So he was talking about the experience self, where we have the experience, but then also the narrative self, where the stories we tell ourselves about why that happened.
Yes, absolutely.
I mean, that to me is like HCD as well, because it's like it's about building that narrative for your customers, the people that you're designing for. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, you know, designing for experience, and I think it's a funny, I use that terminology because, and I'm going to this might be a little bit controversial, I don't believe you can design an experience.
Right.
So I think that you can design for the desired experience, but you never quite know what's going to happen. So if you think about that for yourself and what that might mean. So for example, you go into the bank and you need to do a transaction, and then something happens and it really pisses you off. The thing is that might not be because of what actually happened in the bank. It could be because, quite frankly, you don't have enough money in there.
Yeah.
Or whatever it is.
Raining when you're on the way to the steps in a puddle, all these things, yeah.
Yeah, there's so much context around experience. And I guess to that end, to design with that in mind, that is to be human-centered.
So because I know you're very against patterns as well.
I'm not,
we're just talking about things that you don't like today.
I'm not entirely against patterns, but I do think that we're designing ourselves into a corner.
Yeah.
You know, it's not enough to rely on the patterns, because if we keep relying on them, we're all going to end up wearing like all black, all black, and we're going to all drive a white SUV.
Yeah.
And we're going to live in a 2.2 bedroom house with with
a box and
and we're sort of designing ourselves within an inch of our own lives in a way. So it's also really tricky because there's a part to this that's about inclusion, and so for people who can afford and access it, we're designing ourselves within an inch of our lives. And then for the people who are outside of that, we're not letting them in at all.
Yeah.
So, there's some fundamental problems with patterns. That's not to say that I don't think they're useful, because it's great to get people to learn and to grow. And, you only have to think about what Apple did, with their skeuomorphism and the trash can and how and I mean, that's what I spoke about yesterday with the noise in the car. It's the same thing.
Can you tell that story? Because that was fantastic. I was explaining that to people today.
So basically what happened was my husband and I, we've just moved back from New York.
Yeah.
And we instead of moving to Melbourne, which is where he grew up there, we decided that we would move to Sydney, which he's never lived here. And of course I knew that the public transport was...
Yeah. It's going to be better, so they keep telling us.
To which suburbs? Yeah. If you live in the inner city. Anyway, so I knew that we had to get a new car, and we had been pretty much carless for quite a while, particularly the last 12 months or so in New York. And of course, New York subway is a whole nother level of something. Actually, I was talking to Carly Ayres, who was speaking yesterday about the subway, because she lives in Brooklyn now, and she was talking about how some of her friends are texting her saying that it's so hot on the subway at the moment that people are using those little handheld fans.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's like there's like a heat wave at the moment. So
that sounds dangerous, because they get really packed as well.
Oh, it's foul. And if you haven't seen it, you should. I don't know if I should say this. There's a fantastic Instagram called Subway Creatures. Definitely check it out. It's amazing. I should to answer your question, but just before, well, actually, I was just back there for 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And I was speaking at the Speculative Design Conference Primer, and I was on the subway, and there was this guy, and he was real old. He was like 80 plus, and he was so cool. He had on a zoot suit that was it was like pale pink with pinstripes that were shiny, and then he had on these maroon pointy shoes that were patent leather, and this massive maroon hat, and all gold.
Awesome.
And he had like just 2 big bags of cheesecakes, like mountains of cheesecake. It was amazing. Anyway, so to avoid public transport, we decided that we needed to get a car, and I think Sydney, you really need a car. Plus, we have a bulldog who we have to transport around. Anyway, so we decided to get a car, and we started test driving loads of cars. So we test drove small cars, SUVs, hybrids, the whole shebang. We really wanted a hybrid, to be honest, and we were trying very hard. But you know, it's again designed a little bit outside the price range for most of us mere mortals right now. So, and there are some, but they weren't the ones that we wanted. So test drove all these cars, and the cars were just, something felt wrong about them. Every single car just felt the same. Every feature was the same, in a different order. You know, and then I'm driving these cars, and I'm like, there's another one of this car. There's another one of this car. There's another one of this car. Oh my God, they're everywhere. What's going on? Every car looked the same. So then I went into this cycle of trying to find a car that was different.
Yeah.
So I went with my husband to test drive a particular car, which I don't want to shame. I don't want people running out there trying to get a test drive so that they can hear the noises in the car. But we test drove this. It was the top of the line model of a very configurable vehicle that's a hybrid SUV, and we would never have been able to afford the top of the line model. But anyway, we test drove one. That's what they were trying to sell us. Anyway, so we get in this car, and the first thing that we notice is that we're driving, and you could push these buttons, and the dashboard would literally move, and then you could move it back a different way. And
Okay.
It was actual physical transformation, and then it sort of had digital components to it. And we were like, whoa, this is like Bumblebee.
Completely like a transformer. What's the point though?
That's my point.
Right.
So, so then the car salesman is sitting in the back seat, like leaning through the middle, and he's going, yeah, do this, do that, and he says, why don't you try the sports mode? And there was this series of buttons that were all different types of modes. So I put it into sports mode, and you know, it's a hybrid car. They're quiet.
Yeah.
And this particular type of hybrid, like they are so quiet, because I know someone who's got one, and literally I've been standing in their driveway and they've driven up, and you're like,
Yeah.
They're silent, right? So I put it into sports mode, and the thing, you felt the power immediately, like, you know, and then on top of that, it starts making these noises. My husband is like, yes, this is amazing. This is the best car ever. You can turn the noises on and off. And I'm like, turn the noises on and off. And I'm listening like, what? Where is that coming from? And I'm like, that's coming from a speaker. That's got to be coming from a speaker. It sounds digitized. And then I was sort of putting my foot down on the accelerator, and it was a semi-manual. It was kind of. So I'm sort of accelerating, and the sound wasn't quite matching up to the feel of the car, to the responsiveness. And I'm not a hoon, but I do have a thing for cars, sort of. Like my first car was a Nissan 180SX turbo. Like I like hot boxes, all right? Just okay. So I know a little bit about cars, but not a lot. Like, let's be real. But I know about responsive. So I'm like, there's something wrong here. Like, and it sounds a bit digital. Excuse me, car salesperson. Is the noise that's coming from this car coming from the engine or somewhere else? And he literally turns to me and laughs and says, it's kind of fake car noises. And I'm like, no, this isn't happening to me. are you serious? And my husband and I just look at each other and we're kind of like, and we thought it was funny, and he's laughing, the car salesman's laughing. And
nervously, hoping you still buy the car.
well, he wasn't even nervous. He just thought it was funny, but I was then nervous because I'm like, okay, we've just had a dashboard that transforms like a transformer and noises that come from the inside of the car. Like, what is the point of this vehicle? It did have a really cool seat feature, but that's beside the point. But anyway, so, you know, we quickly left the place and we talked a lot about it. And for a while, we were actually thinking of getting it anyway because it was a beautiful car in every respect. And features up the wazoo. Like, I was going to say it's kind of a bit like Photoshop. You never really use all the features, even though there's some really cool stuff.
It's nice to know you've got it though.
It's nice to know you've got it, but you never know if you're really ever going to use it. Because me with Photoshop is like I have my special set that I always use. So that's what it was like, and I guess in that moment, and it, you know, it's not new. This feeling is not new to me. When I'm very aware of the absurdity of design, acutely. But when I saw a car salesman acknowledge the absurdity of something in a car, I was like,
it's the end of times.
This is not okay. Like, this is bad. And ultimately what it comes down to for me is that what I don't like is watching designers in particular, and clients as well, but let's start with designers. Watching designers make features and functionalities
for the sake of,
for nothing, and then charging clients to do so. And sometimes the client is asking for those things, but my belief is that it is in our interest to highlight and say, hey,
that's
you
ridiculous.
know, this is like not really worth doing. You know that this is like a waste of people's time, or it's a waste of your money.
Is it because we've got stuck on this kind of cycle, like every year we need to do a release, and so they're like, oh, we're going to have something new that goes into the car?
I honestly, I don't know. I'm not 100% sure why they're doing it. I mean, I can only think that this particular car brand is kind of known for their features. Having like real feature-packed cars, I suppose. Maybe it's to stay ahead of the game. Maybe it's to make the experience better. And so this is where things go pear-shaped, because what does it mean to actually make a better experience? And don't get me wrong, like, I'm not one of these people who thinks that everything has to, and in fact, I'm actually I'm a bit against this too. That, you know, people think that things have to be simple and fast and effective to be a good experience. No, that's going back to the patterns. I think you have to design in complexity because humans are complex creatures. But at the same time, you don't need to treat them like idiots and feed them something that's just wasting their time.
You had a great quote yesterday, that is the juice worth the squeeze, which I really loved. And you talked about, before you say yes, asking why, which I think is something we desperately need to do. Yeah,
but it's scary.
Just not in design, in everything.
In everything, absolutely in everything. But it's scary, I think, for a designer. To be honest, it's scary for anybody who has a client to say to them, well, to tell them to be honest. And I guess, you know, in what I do in my own practice, I guess what I would hope that I do is hold a mirror up and say, I want you to take a look, because you need to see what I see. You know, and I'm going to help you see that thing. And often that's the problem, that when we're in our own little bubble, we can't really see the forest for the trees. We're so busy looking over there, we can't really see what is actually going on. And I guess that's what I try to do for my clients. I try to help them to see that, because sometimes they can't. Sometimes there's limitations that prevent them from doing so. So, you know, as an independent designer, it can be very hard to say, no, I'm not going to do that thing, or actually, you know, maybe have you asked why you want to do that? Or, you know, how can we have that conversation? Because for so many reasons, it could be, you know, you just want to get paid. It could be, you know, you don't want to lose the client. There's a number of reasons why, but at the same time, I think it's important to ask yourself, if I don't ask, what could happen as a result? If I don't highlight that this is I mentioned it briefly yesterday, I didn't go into too much detail about it, but I guess I see design as a risk mitigation tool.
Yep.
It's a way to figure out if the thing that we're going to make, especially when especially strategic design. So it's a way for us to figure out if what we're going to make is going to be the right thing, short term and long term. And so I see design as being this risk mitigation tool, and that's not how most people see design. Most people see design as making something.
Yeah. Although I think it's changing slightly, with people talking about design thinking now. I mean, hopefully if design thinking is done right, part of that is a kind of audit of where the client is at that point.
Well, I don't know if that's how I see design thinking either.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, design thinking is a tool to get non-designers involved in the design process.
Okay.
That's how I see design thinking. Design thinking in itself is not a practice. It's a set of tools.
Yeah.
And I think that anyone can use those. And I guess that's kind of where Mum comes into it a little bit.
Yep.
And I think people get design thinking and service design really confused. And I don't actually believe that they're the same thing, because when you're in the thick, the hardcore of designing a service, I'm talking like, let's go bike sharing service or car sharing service or something along those lines. All the design thinking methods in the world ain't going to save you.
Yeah.
Like, design thinking did not stop people throwing O-bikes in the Yarra.
Yeah.
Let's be real. Design thinking is like a tiny, tiny step in a very long, complicated process of getting a service to market. So I think design thinking has, in many ways, created a lot of unnecessary confusion around design. And don't get me wrong, I think that design thinking is a great tool to use. I regularly use, in fact, every day I use some type of design method. But if that's what you're relying on as a design practice, you're in trouble.
Yeah.
You need to be using many different types of design and tools, and anyway.
That's amazing. Thank you so much.
Okay.
We're at time. If you guys want to watch Chi's amazing talk from yesterday, you can do. Just look on YouTube. And thank you so much for taking the time and running over half of the exhibition centre.
Thanks for having me. I'm very pleased and humbled and to be here. I mean, Adobe's been a big part of my life since I was very young, since I was 14, 15. And I mean, I am much older than that now. I know I don't look it.
What Photoshop were you using it then?
2?
Yeah, that's what I learned on. I felt like I kind of knew 2, like nearly 100%.
My first job, I was I went to film school, and then my very first job was as a visual designer. Well, I was a shit kicker for a creative director, but whatever. Anyway, and my very first computer that I had in that office, it was a 20-inch black and white monitor that we used Photoshop on.
Wow.
Yeah, and he was a master typographer, and so we at the time, because we were hand crafting type, and he was pretty old school. He was actually using Photoshop to help with his typography. So so Photoshop's been with me a long time, and also when I was much younger, I also used to make a lot of rave flyers. Yeah. And so there was lots of beveled edges.
That was my bread and butter.
Yeah. So lots of beveled edges.
Band posters. Yep. Rave.
Yep.
Where can people find out more about you or follow you or?
So I don't really have a lot of social media, but the one that I do have is LinkedIn. So search Chi Ryan, CHIRYAN. I definitely post. Well, I post a fair amount of things on there, but that's the channel that I like best, because that's a business channel.
Yep.
And this is really important for designers, that you need to learn how to use LinkedIn, because it's a really amazing business tool. And if you're a designer, you need to get business. So connect those two things together, and it works really, really well.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Come back very shortly. We're going to have Jeremy on with his guest. So thank you, and see you soon.
Thank you.